today I'm going to talk about antibiotic use in animal health, and specifically I'm going to talk about the Veterinary Feed Directive. We'll talk about consumer attitudes, access to antibiotics, the VFD implementation timeline, the final FDA rule, the implementing of the Veterinary Feed Directive. I'll make a few comments about electronic feed directives as well. So I want to start off with consumer attitudes regarding antibiotics, because I think that, as Dr. Thaxton said, I sit on most of the large animal or the cattle types of animal welfare committees in the U.S. And I would say over the last 8 to 10 years, I would think that animal welfare was predominantly the big issue that our industry faced. And I'll tell you that in the last 18 months, animal welfare has actually slipped back behind the scenes, and this is what it's about, and that is it's about antibiotic use. I think there's a huge misperception by most consumers regarding antibiotics. One, in how that we use them on farm, but two, more so about how antibiotic residues may or may not even be in their product. Antibiotic use is a public health issue. Antibiotics, I think, are very important from the aspect of we want a clean, healthy animal going into the arbiter. Because when you don't have a healthy animal going into the slaughter plant, you're taking more pathogens into the slaughter plant. And if you have an interest in reading history, there's some great books about 1910 about the slaughter plants and animal welfare and food safety in New York City. They basically will turn your stomach as you go back and read about what happened in those facilities. So one thing is antibiotic use. What I don't want to see is the nidus of what we're beginning to hear, the small drum beats in the background of antibiotic use shouldn't be allowed at all in veterinary medicine, especially in food-producing animals. And I think that's a tremendous problem that we're going to face in the coming years. 48% of consumers feel uncomfortable about antibiotic use in animal production. This is from a U.S. Farm and Ranch Alliance Consumer Attitude Survey, of which there were 1,400 responses. Now, one of the things I think that's interesting about this is I will come back and say this: consumers are uncomfortable about antibiotic use in animal production, but I'm going to say of those 1,400 people, probably 1,399 had no absolute idea how antibiotics were being used on any farm. Okay, so therefore they're uncomfortable. The other one that is really concerning to me is this one. 71% of consumers have serious or some concerns about conventional methods. Well over half of American consumers are concerned about conventional methods. Okay, so let's talk for a few minutes. What are conventional methods? Sow gestation crates, battery cages. You could have open pen housing for calves. As Ms. Anglin was showing, I would say 98, 99% of all dairy calves in the U.S. are raised individually in hutches. But there's a tremendous number of people who have concerns about conventional methods, okay, which means conventional food as well. And then from that aspect, as I had mentioned earlier, the reason that we are today raising baby calves, typically in individual hutches, is primarily because of disease control. And when we go into group housing, we see much higher incidences of E. coli, rotavirus, coronavirus in particular. The other one is interesting, is 53% of Americans wonder if the food they buy is safe. Did you realize it was that high? Now then, I'm pretty much a realist. I'm sort of like, really? When was the last time you got sick from buying food in the United States of America? Because I can tell you, if you go back to the CDC website, day before yesterday, several new updates on the CDC website, fewer people are getting sick in the United States every year from foodborne illness. But you have, I mean, where's the reality to this? You know, as I often tell people, I'll buy you a first-class ticket to any place in the world you want to go that you think is safer to eat than the United States of America. Where do you want to go? Taiwan? Singapore? London? I'd take a meal in the United States of America before I went any other country. Other aspects of consumer attitudes, specifically about antibiotics. You say, meaning we use antibiotics to be more efficient, and consumers say because you only care about making money. I say we use antibiotics to keep animals healthy, and the consumer says you have to use antibiotics because animals are kept in such poor conditions. That's basically verbatim from Humane Society of the United States. Regulatory agency reviews have approved antibiotics as safe after rigorous review processes. You look at, there has not been a new class of antibiotics in human medicine since 1981. I'm not saying a new antibiotic class. You go back and you look at new antibiotic classes in veterinary medicine, there's probably not been a new one, class of antibiotics since probably about 1985. Okay, and so from that aspect, they say we don't know if it's safe for the long term. They've been wrong before. You and I may say that there are rules that dictate maximum residue limits allowed in animals, whereas they may say, the consumer, how can we be sure that any residue is safe? Finally, I say there is no evidence that the use of antibiotics in animals causes resistance in humans. And the consumer says, yeah, right, we're using so many, that has to be part of the reason. So if you go to the CDC website, I want to come back to this comment. This is a fact. This is just out and out a fact. If you look at the top 15 organisms that the CDC is looking at right now today, and we're worried about antibiotic residue or antibiotic over time, antibiotic resistance, 13 of the 15 are not even veterinary pathogens. The largest number of organisms that actually the CDC is worried about, do you know what organism it is? It's Neisseria gonorrhea. It's actually 40% of all of the antibiotic resistance concerns in the world revolve around sexually transmitted diseases, of which those organisms are not pathogens, to my knowledge, in any of the animal species, including dog and cat. Pretty interesting. Now then, there are 2 pathogens on the 15 pathogen list that are of concern to us that could be associated with foodborne illness, and that would be Salmonella and Campylobacter. Okay, so those are the 2 organisms in veterinary medicine that we do need to be very cognizant of. Regarding access to antibiotics, it is a public health issue. They're critical for public health so that we do have animals entering into the slaughter plant that are healthy, vital for livestock and poultry production. So that's going to get back into treating and preventing and controlling disease, and essential for animal well-being. Now, if we look at FDA is concerned about the overuse in animals may reduce effectiveness in humans, and is making important changes to antibiotic use in animals. And finally, FDA's the goal is to promote judicious use. I hate the term judicious because I don't think most people understand what it means. What does it mean? I think responsible use would be a much more appropriate way for you and I to address the situation when we're talking to consumers or we're talking to the food industry. We want to protect public health and help curb the development of antimicrobial resistance. So those are all the things that fall under the umbrella of the FDA. FDA has issued 3 documents proposing to modify the use of medically important antibiotics in food-producing animals. This would be Guidance for Industry 209 and Guidance for Industry 213. We'll go into those a little bit more. And then finally, CFR 558, which would be the publishing of the final rule. 209 is going to be the what component. It establishes judicious use principle, where we limit shared class antibiotics to therapeutic purposes. Now, one of the things is in this talk and what you will see in other talks similar to this is you're going to hear medically important, and you'll hear shared class, and you'll hear non-shared class. Shared class would be antibiotics that are used in both veterinary medicine and human medicine. Examples would be penicillins, tetracyclines, aminoglycosides, macrolides, There's a significant list of the different classes of antibiotics that would be shared class. Then there are the non-shared class, which are the antibiotics that are used only in veterinary medicine. Those typically, the largest class of those would be the ionophores, which are used to prevent coccidiosis in a number of species. So you will see the term shared class or medically important, and they're basically talking about the same number of antibiotics and the same classes of antibiotics. One of the things is we are wanting to maintain use of antibiotics for prevention, control, and treatment of disease. What Guidance to Industry 209 is going to do, and the Veterinary Feed Directive as a whole, it does two major things. It removes antibiotics that were being fed in feed in the past with no oversight. They're moved to veterinary oversight. They're moving from over-the-counter to a Veterinary Feed Directive. That's the first thing that happens with the Veterinary Feed Directive. The second thing that happens, and you don't hear as much about this, is going to be the water-soluble antibiotics that you today can go down to the farmer's co-op and buy without a prescription. Those products are moving to script status as of January 1st, 2017. Okay, so no matter what species that is. Then the other aspect of the regarding 209 and the Veterinary Feed Directive is this only applies to antibiotics. This does not apply to a dewormer or another substance, okay? Antibiotics only are the things that are going to be covered under a Veterinary Feed Directive. So the, for instance, if you're wanting to use a dewormer in feed, you will not be required to have a Veterinary Feed Directive for that purpose. Performance indications are going to change. They will become prohibited. And what that is an antibiotic that was being fed for growth, nutrition, health maintenance, administration of an antimicrobial to an animal or group of animals that resulted in improved performance, weight gain, or feed conversion. So that particular use of antibiotics is going away completely. And all of the sponsors, and a sponsor would be a pharmaceutical company, so Elanco is a sponsor. So Thailand had a growth promotion label in cattle. So that label is being changed by Elanco. They are submitting a new label to FDA, and that new label will be approved probably in September. And by mid-late October of this year, there will be new bags printed for Thailand that will have the new label attached. And at that point forward, once that bag makes it into the feed mill, the feed mill also has to change their label as well. And all of the labels have to be changed by all of the sponsor companies by January 1st of 2017. When we look at products that are affected versus unaffected, I guess another way of the way this is mentioned is medically important, non-medically important. So the non-medically important are unaffected, so these products or these antibiotic classes will not require a Veterinary Feed Directive. And the reason being is they are not used in human medicine. So they would include the ionophores, in our case, Elanco Rumensin. You also have polypeptide antibiotics, carbadox, bambermycin, and pleurimutulins. Those are the products that will still be used in veterinary medicine without a Veterinary Feed Directive. On the other hand, the products that are deemed important for human medicine and used both in animals and humans, these classes of antibiotics are going to fall underneath a Veterinary Feed Directive. So if you want to feed one of these products in a food-producing animal, whether it be salmon or whether it be a beef calf or a hog or a poultry, penicillins, cephalosporins, quinolones, fluoroquinolones, tetracyclines, macrolides, sulfas, and glycopeptides will all fall under a Veterinary Feed Directive. Once again, the therapeutic uses will still be allowed under veterinary supervision. That would be to treat animals diagnosed with an illness, control the spread of illness in a herd, or prevent illness in healthy animals when exposure is likely. And then on the other hand, there will no longer be allowed this production use for enhanced growth or improved feed efficiency. So any of the products in the marketplace today that have this particular label claim on the bag, you will notice in the new bags that this claim will go away, and that particular antibiotic will not be able to be fed for that purpose. Now, most of the time, these antibiotics have multiple claims, so they will still be in the marketplace, maybe at a different level of feeding rate, maybe in a different particular class of animals. So within Elanco, an example of that would be we have an antibiotic that is fed to feedlot steers that does not have a label claim for dairy animals. And so in that case, that product still will not be able to be fed to dairy replacement heifers, even though it can be fed to feedlot steers. This is getting into a little bit more of a deeper dive on very specific products. So the implications is food producers are not losing all feed-grade antibiotics. The way that they will be used will change. They will come underneath the oversight of a veterinarian. And the key phrase is medically important, which refers to any drug that is used as a therapeutic antibiotic in human medicine. Guidance for Industry 213 is the how component. The recommendations for voluntary aligning products. It advises companies on how to revise labeling and promotion, and then 2 options to change product labels. Basically, you voluntarily remove production indications and or seek new therapeutic indications at current doses. And the bottom line is all of this has to be completed by December of 2016. And there are a total of 26 sponsors. 26 different pharmaceutical companies have an antibiotic that is a feed-grade antibiotic that's currently fed to food-producing animals today. And all 26 companies have basically signed letters of compliance saying that they will comply with the new rules and the changes. CFR 558 is the final rule and the publishing of it. The VFD process strives towards a less burdensome process. Provides greater flexibility for veterinarians and streamlines FDA's administrative procedures. A lot of producers, I would say more so in the beef cattle side of the business, think that the Veterinary Feed Directive is new. I mean, this is new, it's a whole bunch of bureaucracy, and it's, a bad thing, and on and on and on. That's not the case. The Veterinary Feed Directive has been in place, I think, for 10 or 12 years. Actually, Pulmotil, a product that we have on our beef cattle side of our business, actually came to the marketplace as a VFD drug, okay? If you wanted to feed Pulmotil to beef cattle, from the very first day it came out into the marketplace, you had to basically have a VFD signed by your veterinarian. So this is not completely a new process. It's a new process to some people in some industries. Existing regulatory framework, it designates the VFD as medicated feed needing veterinary oversight, limits the use of such products to veterinary oversight. It requires a written statement or form issued by a veterinarian. One aspect of this is the local veterinarian in a little town of Greenwood, Arkansas, is not going to be able to call up Purina Mills and say, hey, this is Doc, and you need to put some feed, you need to put some antibiotics in Dr. Thaxton's poultry feed for her birds. A phone call doesn't cut it. Okay, everything's going to be in triplicate, or quadruplicate, okay, for audit purposes that will occur later on. It streamlines the process, once again, from over-the-counter to a veterinary feed directive. Once again, it also takes water-soluble antibiotics and makes them script. We'll show the timeline in just a few minutes. The goals of the modification of the VFD is to improve the efficiency of the VFD program while continuing to protect public health. It strives towards less burdensome process and provides greater flexibility. This is the timeline that we have been on. The original 209, 213, these were published way back in 2012. There were docket comments public hearings in 2013. You had the release of the final 213, and the draft VFD came out in late 2013. The sponsors must notify CVM, Center for Veterinary Medicine, which is the branch of the Food and Drug Administration that veterinary drugs fall under. Basically, the sponsors had to notify FDA by the first quarter of 2014 if there was an intent to engage, meaning that they were going to maintain their product in the marketplace. If they were not going to engage, basically that particular antibiotic would come off the market January 1st of next year. Release of the final rule occurred in June of 2015. The final VFD rule goes into effect October 1st, 2015. Basically, there was a voluntary component to this. When we get to January 1st, 2017, implementation is complete. There is no voluntary aspect of it. And this is where I jokingly say the beatings will continue until morale improves. So the compliance timeline, the approach is not voluntary for producers or feed manufacturing once labels have been transitioned. So what does that mean? So with Tylian, a product that my company has, once we make the change on the label, on the bag, and once that bag makes it to the feed mill manufacturer, let's say that's October 1st, basically at that point, that trumps the January 1st date, meaning that once the new bag on the new label is in the mill, then that particular product from that day forward falls under the VFD. 26 affected companies, all 100% confirmed to engage. So I want to spend some time here because I think this is the nuts and bolts for those of you who are going to need a veterinary feed directive in order to feed an antibiotic to an animal or a group of animals. And so one of the things is as I'm talking to producer groups, I talk about a prescription process. Now, Food and Drug does not want this to be called a prescription. Okay, this is to be called a veterinary feed directive, but you're going to see a lot of similarities. And one of the things is so what are some of the things that are on a prescription bottle? Okay, so you've got the name of the drug, you've got the strength of the drug, there's probably the number of pills if it is a pill form in a bottle. But before that, at the very top of the label would be the name and address, phone number of the pharmacy. There also would be the name and phone number of the physician writing the script, right? Okay, and then the one thing that you will see here that you don't see on a human bottle would be, okay, so you would see refills. Refills will be available here.
Premises.
Slaughter withdrawal time, right? Hopefully there's not a slaughter withdrawal time on a human pill bottle. Okay, so let's go through these. The veterinarian's name, address, and telephone number. The client's name, business, or home address and telephone number. The premise at which the animals specified in the VFD are located. So this gets a little bit hairy, especially if you have multi-premise locations. So this is going to be much more of an issue for the swine and poultry industry in particular. The date of the VFD issuance, that's the day that I as a veterinarian, if I sign the VFD for you, and in the case here, I'm not your personal attending veterinarian, so I cannot sign legally. I cannot sign a VFD for any of you in the room, okay, because I am not your attending veterinarian. There would be the expiration date. The expiration date can go out as far as 180 days. That's as far out as a VFD can be written. The name of the drug, the species and production class of animals to be fed the VFD drug. So in that particular case, we would have bovine. If we were looking at Pulmotil, the production class would be animals for slaughter, because if you go back and you look at the label claim for Pulmotil is to only be fed to animals for slaughter. And that's why Pulmotil cannot be fed to dairy replacement animals. Dairy replacement animals are replacement animals. They're not animals being treated or being raised for slaughter. So that's why there is a very specific difference. The approximate number of animals to be fed the VFD feed by the expiration date of the VFD. This one gets much more difficult. But this, I think, from an ethical standpoint of a veterinarian, if you have 1,000 animals, I shouldn't be writing down 5,000 animals. Okay? Because if I'm doing that, there's probably intent on my part or your part, or we have gotten in cahoots with each other to basically skirt the system, right? That's going to get veterinarians in trouble, and it's also going to get producers in trouble. You need to be as close to this as you possibly can be. You know, as a typical rule, it's a 10,000 head feedlot. We know that we have 38 animals on average sick per month. You know, we can go back into your records and find out how many animals were treated for the month of August last year. So, I mean, you know, we may need to put some time and effort into this, but I think this is very important. The indication for which the VFD is issued, this is critical. It's really easy. It's whatever's on the bag of the antibiotic, okay? That's what the claim is. One thing that is very critical that you understand about a veterinary feed directive, there is no extra label drug use. A veterinarian does not have the right, under the state law or federal law, to use or prescribe a product being given in feed by any other method of route of ingestion or by any other amount in the feed. So if the label claim is 20 milligrams per pound per day, that's the only thing you can write it for. I do not have the legal authority to write it for 30 milligrams per head per day. Whereas when you get into injectables, it's a completely different story. Injectables fall under AMDUCA, and I have the right as a veterinarian to go at a higher dose, but I'm also responsible for the wait period, the slaughter withdrawal at the same time if I decide to go that way with an injectable. As a veterinarian, I cannot write this at a higher level than whatever is the label claim. The same thing for the level and the duration of use. I cannot change the duration of use. Whatever is on the bag, that's what it has to be on the VFD. The withdrawal time, special instructions and cautionary statements necessary for use of the drug in conformance with the approval. And so this actually gets to be probably more of an issue, as my understanding is there's some poultry antibiotics that have cautionary statements on them on the back of the bag, and that will have to be on the veterinary feed directive. The number of reorders and refills authorized, if permitted by the drug approval. There are some poultry antibiotics that have no refills, okay? So if a poultry operation needs to use more of that product and the veterinary feed directive has already expired and it could only, say, be written for 15 days, at that point, that entity will have to get a second veterinary feed directive signed by their veterinarian. The statement, use of feed containing this veterinary feed directive drug in a manner other than as directed on the label, extra label use, is not permitted. Excuse me. This is critical. And this is going to cause some consternation in the beef cattle business when it comes to the prevention of anaplasmosis. Okay? You will be required, I will be required to have a veterinary feed directive at New Frontier Angus Ranch if we're feeding tetracycline next summer to prevent anaplasmosis. And the next thing is I can only feed tetracycline at the label claim that's going to be on that bag. Now then, where we can probably get into some discussion is the old label claims. Is that antibiotic being fed at a high enough level that you can actually prevent anaplasmosis? And so that gets into more of a scientific question, okay, of whether or not the old label claim actually is going to be high enough. The other aspect that is very interesting that's not showing up anywhere here is regarding the use of minor species in deer. Okay, so in Texas, there are a tremendous number of large deer ranches with high fences. And there's a lot of anaplasma, babesiosis, a number of tick-borne diseases that occur in those deer that today they go down to the local feed store, buy some tetracycline crumbles, mix it with mineral, feed it to those deer, and those deer do quite well. They will not be able, those deer farms will not be able to do that because tetracycline is not labeled for deer, and there was no exemption to the CFR for minor species. Okay, so now then you're going to have some large deer ranches next summer lose significant numbers of deer, is what I would guess. Or they're going to end up commingling some calves with deer. So that also brings an ethical aspect to it as well that we...
I was going to ask you that question. I'm going to say it now, but that's not just deer. That's lots of species.
Correct.
Quail, there's pheasants, there's chuckers, there's
Yes.
hairy partridge, there's deer.
All the minor species,
And so
which includes sheep and goats.
the Mum's Law is gone. I mean, it's still CFR Part 516, right? They take it out.
So to my knowledge, it's not part of 558.
It's not 558, it's on 516.
Right.
Take it out.
So, but 516 doesn't relate back to 558 directly. It's okay, that's the problem. So I think that this was a slip, to be quite honest, an accidental slip within governance, to be quite honest, that nobody actually stopped to think of it.
Okay, just as
Okay, correct. Okay.
Thank you.
The other aspect is that an affirmation of intent for combination VFD drugs is described in 558. So an example of this would be today, we do not have a clearance for Rumensin with tetracycline. Okay, we've never gone and gotten that combination approval. You cannot come back and use Rumensin and tetracycline together, even with a VFD, because there's not a label claim for those two drug combinations to be approved or to be used together. Okay, so once again, you're getting back to what are the current claims today, or what will the new claims be? And when, come January 1st, we will not have a Rumensin tetracycline claim. So at that point, if you are a dairy producer and you have some 5-weight dairy heifers and they're on Rumensin for the prevention of coccidiosis, and you have an outbreak of a respiratory disease, your veterinarian is not going to be able to say, oh, just go ahead and put some tetracycline crumbles in your feed. You can't do that legally because there's Rumensin already in that feed, and there's not a label claim for a combination of Rumensin and tetracycline. And finally, the veterinarian's electronic signature or written signature. Now then, the other aspects of this is regarding the paperwork trail, is that everybody involved is required to keep all of the records for 2 years. And when I say everybody involved, let's go to a scenario that, so Karen doesn't live far from me, so I'll pick on Dr. Christensen, and she has beef cattle as well. So Dr. Christensen, let's say, wants to feed tetracycline to her beef cattle next summer to prevent anaplasmosis. Okay, so she's got to get a veterinary feed directive written by her veterinarian that covers all of these specifics. So that veterinarian, him or her, have to keep a copy of their VFD that they've written. Dr. Christensen has to keep a copy because she's the final end user. Now then, but depending on where and how she gets her product, if she's getting her product directly from the Purina Mills mill out of Springfield, Missouri, the mill has to have a copy as well. And if that's not the case, let's say she has 10 cows and she's only going to buy 1 bag of mineral with tetracycline in it, then the local Greenwood, Arkansas Farmers Co-op is going to have a copy of it as well. And they have to then provide a copy to the Purina Mills mill in Springfield, Missouri, where that product came from. Okay, so at that point you're to quadruplicate forms, and everybody has to keep their paperwork for 2 years. Okay, in order that if FDA comes back and does an audit, making sure that nobody's overfeeding a medication, nobody is feeding an antibiotic mixed with another product that is not approved, or for whatever reason there may be an audit, everybody has to be able to prove that they have, that they're in compliance. Okay, and so that's a big aspect of it. Probably not a big deal if you're in the poultry industry, the swine industry, you're the large feedlot industry, because we have those kinds of systems in place today, whether it be the way that what's going on with an employee, the way employees are treated, or whether it be the way antibiotics are used, withdrawal times. We have procedures in place that are auditable within the company, or between companies even. Maybe a final food procurement company may want to be able to come in and audit and make sure that you're not using or that you are using a certain product. So, from the large producer segment, this is probably not a whole lot new or different. On the other hand, let's look at what this is going to do to the small producer, okay? Let's look at what this happens to the man or woman here in Fayetteville, Arkansas that has 10 chickens. My understanding is you can't have chickens in the city limits of Fayetteville. And they, in the past, have gone down to a local feed company and bought their chicken scratch with some antibiotic in it. And that's what they have fed for the last 3 years. Okay? But come January 3rd, 2017, that changes. Okay? And then you end up getting also, and that's probably not a big deal when all of these animals are healthy. But now then let's throw into the mix there that we have some chickens that end up getting a bacterial infection that truly need an antibiotic. Okay? Now all of a sudden, that individual's got to go to a veterinarian in Fayetteville, which I'm going to make a snide comment. I'm not sure there's that many veterinarians in private practice in Fayetteville who know how to diagnose anything in chickens to begin with, right? Okay, I'm all about cattle. You do not want to ask me what you want to feed, what antibiotic you want to put in your chicken feed, okay? Even if the advice is free, you've paid too much, okay? But the thing is this brings about a different layer of concern, because all of a sudden now, when that individual can't get a hold of that product, what happens? That's when we turn to the black market. That's when we turn to what I would say unethical aspects. And then the next thing you know is that's also when you end up getting the possibility of a residue in a food product. It may be for their own family, but that still isn't ethically good. And it's still definitely not medically good. Okay, and so once again, I think, one of the issues with the Veterinary Feed Directive is it's going to make things much more difficult for what I would call the true family farmer. This is not the individual making a living in agriculture. This is somebody who, for whatever reason, has decided they want to grow and raise some of their own food. And so this is going to provide an issue for them. We need to maintain record-keeping requirements for 2 years. It does permit electronic storage of VFDs. There are 2 companies in the marketplace already that have electronic VFDs ready to go. My understanding is there will be 2 others that will enter the marketplace between now and January, which will make it really nice because it'll be a drop-down box kind of a system electronically. And so if you have dairy heifers and you click down dairy heifers, it's not going to allow you to feed Pulmotil because Pulmotil doesn't have a label for dairy heifers. So from an electronic standpoint, it'll really bring a lot of protection, I guess I would say, for the veterinarian and the producer, that everything is above board and is correct and legal and ethical. Bottom line, the other aspect, as I said, prohibits the verbal issuance of VFD. Okay, so your veterinarian isn't going to call down to the feed store and say, Jim, give Dr. Christensen some of that feed with some of that antibiotic in it. I'll send you the paperwork in a few days. You don't want to get caught there. Let's talk for a minute about veterinary client-patient relationship, because this is the other aspect I think that is critical about this. So, I consult with a large number of large dairies in Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona in my job. I am not the attending veterinarian. I do not have a license in the state of Texas. I don't have a license in the state of New Mexico. My medical license is in the state of Arkansas. But some of the things that are required at the federal level regarding a valid veterinary client-patient relationship. In states where the Practice Act requirements do not require that a VFD be issued within the context of a state-defined VCPR, FDA is requiring that the VFD be issued within the context of a federally defined VCPR. Okay, so currently today I believe there are 24 states that have in their Practice Act the definition of what a veterinary client-patient relationship is within that state. Arkansas is one of those. The VCPR at the federal level requires the veterinarian, one, engage with the client to assume responsibility for making medical judgments about animal health and the need for medical treatment. Okay, so this is a big issue when you start looking at veterinarians who are answering questions on Facebook pages and things of that nature. It's a really slippery slope to be involved in. Two, the veterinarian must have sufficient knowledge of the animal by virtue of examination and or visits to the facility where animal is managed to initiate at least a general or preliminary diagnosis of the medical condition of the animal. Okay, so I would fulfill that because I'm on my dairies often enough. I wouldn't fulfill the part that I would not have seen that particular animal. Okay, but under a VCPR, a veterinarian does not have to see every animal. Okay, so let's take in the state of Texas, in the feedlots in West Texas, those animals are being treated with antibiotics under a general prescription provided by a veterinarian, but that veterinarian, that man or woman, has not seen every sick animal in that feed yard. Okay, but that still is acceptable under the VCPR. But I think this one is a huge part of it. Provides for any necessary follow-up evaluation or care. Okay? So once again, this is a really big aspect of it. We don't pay airplane pilots to fly airplanes when everything's going right. We pay them when things are not going right. Is that a fair statement? That's what they're getting paid for. That's when you really need a pilot, is when things are not going right. The same thing here is when things are not going right and you have a dog or a cat or a horse or a cow or a chicken, whatever it is, and they have been seen by a veterinarian, and then that veterinarian leaves town on vacation for 3 weeks, ethically that veterinarian has to have somebody on call in order to help this animal for follow-up care and evaluation. And this is a big aspect of why I, as a consulting veterinarian for Elanco, cannot have a valid veterinary client-patient relationship because I'm back in Arkansas on Saturday and Sunday, hopefully.
Are you going to talk about how that affects the small guided scenario you gave us before?
As far as this?
Yeah, number 2 in particular. I was just thinking about, I have not very many veterinarians make house calls.
So Yvonne, you're correct. And that's a big aspect of it as well. Because the other thing is if you are a small animal practitioner in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and you have one client who has backyard birds, you basically are guessing what's the 3 most common conditions of backyard birds in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and making a guess and saying, okay, we're going to put these birds on this antibiotic. But they haven't seen those animals. Basically, a general thumb rule that's not written down is most of the time is it is considered that if you're going to have a valid VCPR, I need to be on your operation at least twice a year. Okay, and it needs to be fairly thorough, and that is how are you storing your drugs? How are your injectables in a refrigerator? You know, let's talk about not reusing needles. Let's talk about injection sites. Where on the animal do we want to give the injection? Clean needles, and then it gets back on into, in particular in the food species, is the withdrawal time, slaughter withdrawal time. So I mean, it's going to be a big issue, or it has the potential to be a big issue. I won't say that it is a big issue. It has the potential. Product classification. Basically, we're talking about type A feeds. Type A feeds is what the feed mill is buying from us in the bag. It would be the full concentration. And then the feed mill may make a premix, which would then be a type B feed. And then you will take and dilute that with corn, soybean meal, whatever, and you're making a type C feed. Okay, and so that's the difference between type A, B, and C feeds. Combination drugs, once again, the other aspect. The feed manufacturer, the feed mill, may not substitute a generic veterinary feed directive drug for a pioneer VFD drug in a combination VFD feed if the generic VFD drug is not part of an approved VFD drug. Okay, so the thing is you have the parent compound, let's say AS700 for tetracycline, been in the marketplace, I don't know, 35, maybe 40 years. There are generics, generic equivalents. But if the sponsor of that generic equivalent has not had that combination approved with their own drug, they cannot be using that, basically saying because the parent compound or the parent company that brought the product to the marketplace, you're basically not able to work off of their coattails. So with a generic compound. Extra label drug use is not permitted. Expiration versus duration. The expiration date defines the period of which the authorization to feed an animal feed containing a VFD drug is lawful, not to exceed 180 days. But there are other drugs in the marketplace that have a very defined expiration date. An example for a product my company has in the beef industry, Tilmicacin, is 45 days. Okay. The duration determines the length of time the VFD feed is allowed to be fed to animals as specified on the product label, i.e. 14 days for Tilmicacin for beef cattle. Okay, so that's the difference between duration and expiration. Specifying animals and location. There is still some discussion, in my understanding, with the Food and Drug Administration regarding this aspect. And that is exactly how specific do you have to be? And does it have to be all the way down to pin 45, pin 46, and pin 47? Or can it just be, it's a physical address location? Okay. Today, my understanding is it's going to have to be down to a pin level. Okay. So am I okay on time? So why don't we open it up for questions? I think there could be a fair number of them. So yes, sir.
I got two. The first one is you made up an example that, say on October 1 of 2016, if you change the label on your Thailand, then you would need to start VFD. What if you didn't have any new bags in inventory at a mill? You just had old bags with the old label. Starting on that day, would you have to start with the VFD?
I'm not 100% certain about this, but my last understanding is those old bags could be used without a VFD, but they could not be used without a VFD after December 31st. Okay, is my understanding. So if you have previous product with the old label, the feed mill can go ahead and use that product without a VFD through the end of the year. But if they use that next January 3rd, even though that bag doesn't require a VFD, the process would require a VFD in that case. Yes, sir.
My second question is, FDA is out there practicing audits right now. What exactly are they doing?
So that's a good question. I was not aware that they were doing that. They did put out, I don't want to say guidance, but they put out a letter on their website a few weeks ago talking about that, that their concern is not about the audit. It's not going to be like on January 3rd, they're out there putting out warning letters. They're wanting people to understand the process, and they're saying that they're going to work with all of the industries to get to a point Now then, how long will that last? I don't know. I would say probably 6 months, but that's Chris Ashworth's opinion. I may be wrong, okay? But the bottom line is there's going to be a lot of questions. You know, if you're a full-time veterinarian in food animal production, you probably know about this. I mean, there's webinars on a weekly basis. I tell you who's going to get caught in this deal, and that's your brother-in-law, who is the small animal practitioner in Fayetteville, Arkansas, who has one food animal producer, and he is clueless that a VFD process is even coming down the road. And that practitioner is the one that's really going to be set on their heels. Yes, sir.
So from a, I don't want to say enforcement standpoint, but who's going to get caught first, the vet or the producer?
So I think that's a good question. I think it depends on who is outside of compliance or guidance, okay? So if it's the veterinarian who writes a VFD inappropriately, it would probably be the veterinarian. On the other hand, you know, if I write all of this out and I tell you exactly what drug to use, at what rate, for how many days, et cetera, and you go off on your own and you do something else, I basically am not going to be the one responsible, because that's part of the paper trail, okay, is you were told to do it this way and you didn't, okay, as a producer.
But are they going to come to the vet first, look at records before they come to the producer?
I don't know. It depends on why did they get involved to begin with, okay? It may be a general audit, okay? They started at, I'm making the things up, okay? So this is not implying anybody. They went to the Purina Mills plant in Springfield, Missouri, and they saw that they used 15,000 pounds of tetracycline. And they want to go and find out where, Purina, can we find out, if you're FDA, can we see where that 15,000 pounds went, okay? And then they're going to probably do some spot checks, okay? And they're going to go to some feed stores and find out that, did they collect Dr. Christensen's FDA paperwork, okay? And then they're probably going to hit some farms to see that they're using things appropriately as well. But I think your overall question is valid. I don't have a perfect answer for you. I don't know. I think it can depend on the situation.